Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. I'm Nicky Campbell. It's your call. 30 years on, does Argentina have a point about the Falklands? Events marking the anniversary are going to be taking place in Britain and Argentina today. In just over 2 months during the conflict in 1982, 255 British lives were lost, 649 Argentinians were killed. 3 decades later, the grief for those who fell is shared by both countries. Yet, the row over sovereignty goes on. David Cameron says Britain is committed to upholding the rights of the islanders who want to remain British. It's about self-determination, says the British government, a principle which is upheld by the United Nations. Not so, says Argentina. Those islands were taken from us by the British over 150 years ago. They're on the other side of the world from Britain. They're a legacy of London's imperialist past. In these modern times, the Union flag has no business being flown over Port Stanley. Who does have the moral high ground? Britain, the islanders, or does Argentina have a point? 0500 909 693.
5 Live.
Let's see what the nation thinks about this. The Falklands, 30 years on. Does Argentina have a point? We're going to get back to Tony Banks. We spoke to Tony earlier on, served with 2 para, now a successful businessman. He did A Secret Millionaire where he met a young ex-squaddy who suffered badly from post-traumatic stress disorder. Tony, good to have you back on. You spoke to us a couple of hours back now. Hi.
Yeah, morning.
And also we've got Nicholas Fuster. I hope the pronunciation is right there, Nicholas. An Argentinian moved to London 2 years ago to study politics. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, the pronunciation is perfect.
Oh, well, that's a change for me then. Thank you very much for being there.
Thank you.
We've got Tom in the London area, Nigel in Hemel Hempstead. Good morning, Tom. Hello, Nigel.
Hi.
And many more to come. Nicholas Fuster, make the case for Argentina and the Falklands, or the Malvinas, as you would no doubt call them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the islands belong to Argentina because I have 2 reasons to say that: geographic reasons and historical reasons. The geographic reasons are not because Argentina is the closest country to the islands, but because the islands are into the Argentine sea shelf. And the historic reasons are that I don't know if many people know this, but the first ones to be there were Spanish, and in 1829, the provinces of the Rio de la Plata, that were the early Argentina, took possession of the islands, and Britain did not complain. Then there was an Argentine mayor there, and the North American and English fishing boats didn't want to pay the fees to fish in the area, to work in the area. So in 1831, the sailors of the corvette called U.S. Lexington sacked the port, the goods and the properties, and destroyed the local artillery.
So were the islands, when you say the Argentinians were the first there, it was 1829, I think you said, were the islands...
There was an Argentine representation in the islands.
Were the islands uninhabited?
There was an Argentine settled there in the islands.
The first people on the islands were what? Spanish?
The first people who arrived to the islands, it's not clear if they were Spanish or Dutch, but they were not English.
Right. So there were no indigenous people on the island.
No.
Right. So Spanish or Dutch.
Spanish or Dutch. Yes.
See from our Dutch callers this morning. They'll be hitting the lines. Carry on.
Yeah, and then as I said before, sailors of the corvette, the U.S. Lexington, sacked the port, the goods and the properties, destroyed the artillery, sending the principal settlers to Montevideo in Uruguay.
Right.
And then the mayor, that was called Luis María Fernet, he went to Buenos Aires asking for help in 1833. There was a civil war in Argentina. And then England settled on the islands and took British population. So then people who are living in the islands since then are British. They have always been, and they will always be. That's out of discussion. Absolutely.
Tom in London, what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting... I think the main point is this. It was said earlier that an Argentine politician has said that the current inhabitants of the Falkland Islands are simply the descendants of colonists. But there's a really key point here. Mm-hmm. The current... By and large, almost overwhelmingly, the current population of Argentina are people descended from colonists. And how did they obtain possession of Argentina? They did that by invading the land, by exterminating the indigenous population. So really it's a bit rich for current Argentine political figures to use that argument against the Falkland Islands, really.
Do you really, Nicholas Fuster, have the moral high ground given the extermination of the Amerindians?
it's like this is true what has been said, but it's not true at the same time. Because it's true that in Argentina, first of all, there were people who were killed, and I am my ancestors were all European. Argentina got lots of immigration, particularly during the Russian Revolution and during both wars, and the Aboriginals have been killed many years before that. I'm not justifying at all.
But it does. Some people see this as a great inconsistency in the position about who was there first. Tom, you can come back in a second. Let's bring Nigel in Hemel Hempstead in, another of our callers. Hi, Nigel.
Good morning, Nicky. Yes, I'm very pleased, actually, to make a contribution here. I'm afraid Nicholas is wrong with his facts. The Argentines actually first arrived on the Falklands in 1820. This is an American sea captain called Jewson, who pirated a few ships, landed on the Falklands, claimed them for Argentina, and then left. He didn't even tell the Argentines that he'd actually done it. They found out through other sources, through other captains reporting what Jewson had done. The settlements by Louis Vernet, well, Vernet actually reported that he preferred British sovereignty over the Falklands. The British landed in the Falklands originally in 1690. That was the HMS Desire.
No, but the Portuguese beat. This is turning into a fascinating history lesson. The Portuguese beat them to it. They were discovered by members of the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan's, I hope that's right, I've only ever read that word, never said it, expedition in 1520.
No, that's incorrect.
That's what I've got here on my BBC fact sheet. Nigel, you know better. Go on.
There is no guarantee that the islands that were discovered by Magellan's expedition were the Falklands. In fact, it is strongly believed that they may have been the islands of Tierra del Fuego that he actually sighted. But he didn't land, and landing on the islands is the important fact. And that didn't happen until Captain Strong turned up in 1690. So
what about the French in 1764?
They established a settlement at Port Louis.
Right.
That was in 1764. We turned up, that's on East Falkland.
Right.
We turned up on West Falkland in 1765. Did not know about the French being there. And we set up a settlement in West Falkland. And the two settlements grew up together, but not knowing about each other until the very next year when our captain went round the islands exploring them, found the French settlement and told them about our claim, and then both settlements grew up together. But the French were evicted because there was a treaty between France and Spain that we would the Falklands or any land south of the Atlantic.
Okay. Nicholas Fuster. I mean, such expertise from Nigel and Tom. Thank you very much for calling us. Nicholas Fuster, doesn't all this historical web tell us that ultimately we need to sweep it all away, and the Falklands should be all about who lives there? It's called self-determination.
Yes, I know what you mean. The fact is, with the self-determination, is for the local, the people who are local from there. This is not the case of the Malvinas Islands.
So it's not the case for the USA then, either.
Sorry?
Because people are, USA, huddled masses, the immigrant country. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people in the USA have been there for a shorter time than British people in the Falklands.
Yeah, but the fact is that, it's true what you say, but the fact is that the islands belong to... The islands are not islands in the middle of nowhere, and we are trying to find out who arrived first, but we don't know it because it's not very clear for any of us. The islands are... The land of the islands belong to a sea shelf, and the sea shelf belongs to a country.
So we're talking... Is this a tectonic plate, sort of?
Yes, it is. Right. It is. So underneath the water, the land is connected.
It's part of the sea shelf. Nigel, it's part of the sea shelf.
No, I'm afraid that fails as well. That sort of claim would say the United States owns Canada or Mexico because they happen to be on the same sea shelf, or that Great Britain owns the rest of Europe because we happen to be on the same sea shelf. It's a false argument. It's always been a false argument. In actual fact, Chile and Uruguay, which happen to be part of the same Spanish dominion at the time that Argentina split away, both have claims, equal claims to the Falklands, but they've never asserted them. Their claims to the Falklands, again, derive from exactly the same grounds as the Argentine claims.
How interesting. I'm loving this. This is great. What do you make of it, Tony Banks?
Well, I think we've got to look at the fact that the Argentinian claims are quite spurious. At the end of the day, the islands have been populated by British people since the early 1800s. And we have to look at this issue of self-determination, and this is the main issue. And when, having visited the Falklands just 2 years ago, it was very apparent to me that the Falklanders have no desire whatsoever to be anything but British. And we have to respect their rights.
We have to respect their rights, surely, Nicholas Fuster.
Definitely. The rights of everyone should be respected. Mm-hmm. What I want to say is that I do believe that the island should be under Argentine administration, which doesn't mean that that the islanders should be kicked out. In my personal opinion, both governments, the Argentine and the British one, should work together to protect the islanders. But I do believe that the island should be under Argentine administration. This is what I want to say. I think that Argentina is insisting on negotiating pacifically, and England has threatened to send a war submarine to defend the islands. A kind of pre-war attitude that it's not necessary.
Do you think this is a classic example of British colonialism?
Definitely.
And it's not Argentinian colonialism.
Well, just if you take any history book, you will realize how many colonies Argentina had and how many colonies England had.
Nigel, is that a point?
No, I'm afraid it's not again. They fail again. The Argentines are trying to colonize the Falklands. They didn't own the area in Patagonia when the Falklands was founded by the British in 1764. In fact, they didn't turn up in Patagonia until well into the 19th century. As previously mentioned, they exterminated the Indians to seize the land in Patagonia. And what is to say that they wouldn't do the same again when they occupy any Falklands?
Nigel, this is the perfect phone-in for you. This is the perfect your call for you.
I'm afraid so, yes. I'm a bit of a historian concerning the Falklands, so I know quite a bit about it.
You've been waiting 30 years for this one. Okay, listen, let's bring Marcus in London. I've got to say, we like a conversation. We like a robust conversation. We enjoy a row. It's always interesting. From the white heat of passion can come great truths. But we are, I've got to be honest with you, at the moment struggling to find anyone who says that Argentina has a point. Now, maybe if we were to do this phone in on Buenos Aires FM, it might be the other way around. But we'll see. So Marcus, what do you think?
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, obviously, the Argentinian position, that just saying that the islands are closer to Argentina, so and we're 8,000 miles away. And on that basis, as my text said, we've got to hand back the Channel Islands to France. Perhaps we could put a claim in Iceland. What does America do about, say, Arizona or New Mexico? Does it have to hand that back to the Mexicans? After what the history there? What happens to the Canary Islands, which are closer to Morocco? What happens to Ceuta or Melilla in the Spanish enclaves in Morocco? The whole thing is just, there's all these historical anomalies all around the world. And for Argentina to claim like this, why don't they just, 30 years ago, they made a mistake.
No, that's not right, because the government was not representative. It was not chosen by the people.
Yes, exactly.
So Argentina didn't make a mistake. There was the military government.
Let me come back.
Well, they represented your people at the time.
They did not represent the people.
The people were not celebrating in the streets then.
Well, yeah, a few people were celebrating in the streets. In Britain, because you have Nazi groups in Britain, there are just a few, then you would say that British is a Nazi country. Of course you wouldn't say that.
Surely the reason General Galtieri and the fascist junta did it was to get the people behind them, and they succeeded in that. It was a classic rabble-rousing policy, wasn't it? To sort of, it was what they call a dog whistle, get the Falklands back, because there is such strong feeling in Argentina about that, and there still is. We know there still is. So it was popular at the time. It was ultimately tragic and terrible. Those lives were lost and futile, but it was very popular. Nicholas Fuster, I've got to say, I think Marcus is right.
Well, the truth is that I haven't lived in that time. I have not lived in that time. I just know that the last military government was maybe the darkest point in the history of Argentina.
It was.
Okay, and...
May I say, excuse me, sir, in Argentina, may I just say, because I work in the wine trade. I sell a lot of Argentinian wine.
Mm-hmm. Do you like them?
Of course I do. If you took the softly approach for the next, don't think the next 50 years, think longer. Mm-hmm. Trade, welcome, show the islanders that you're nothing to be feared. It won't happen overnight, but the attitude that your country is taking at the moment is just driving yourself and the islanders further apart. And there's never ever going to be a settlement.
What do you think about the attitude that your country is taking? There was the United Nations.
30 years ago, there was a war. We got to.
Go on. Let Nicholas answer.
The only way to sort things out with the war. This is the only way we have to sort things out. The United Nations have asked both governments to negotiate in the year 1976, before the military government started in Argentina.
And it was happening.
No, England has not done that, and it's
actually, it appears Thatcher was quite close to looking at some sort of lease-back agreement.
Thatcher was close to do it, that's true. She sent someone to the island, someone who was not welcomed by the islanders. This person came back to London saying that the island should be given back to Argentina. And then the military government, without knowing this, they went to war.
Okay, well listen. I'd like to hold for a second. Nigel, are you still with us? Feel free to stay a little bit longer. Your expertise is extraordinarily welcome. So that's fine if you're able to.
Let me ask you, Nicky.
We're going to. You can ask more questions in a second. We're going to speak to Jeremy Bryan after the travel news, Foreign and Commonwealth Minister for the Falklands region. No, I did it again. Region. I've made worse errors. Jeremy Bryan, good morning.
Good morning, Nicky.
Okay, and it's good to have you on, Minister.
It's a very interesting conversation, and Nigel's historical perspective is very interesting as
Nigel's he should go straight from here to Eggheads, I think. I really do. So, more in just a minute. Let's have some travel news from Michelle. Right, Jeremy Bryan, Foreign and Commonwealth Minister for the Falklands region, I'm delighted to say, is engaging in our conversation this morning. As you say, some very interesting points so far. I'm delighted that Nicholas is still with us, Nicholas Fuster, Argentinian who is working over here. We've just looked this up, actually. The distance between Argentina's coast and the Falklands is 700 kilometres, a point made by Senator Daniel Filmus to me the other day, the Argentinian senator. It's the same distance between London and Geneva. Jeremy Bryan, last week I spoke to this senator. I'm going to play you some of it and get your reactions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Good. He's chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Argentine Senate. He was adamant the islands will one day peacefully return to Argentinian control.
Por supuesto que sí, no es que creo, estoy seguro. No hay ninguna.
Of course, I don't just believe that, I'm sure of it. There's no suppression which lasts forever. It's just a matter of how much time it takes for it to be understood that there must be dialogue and a need to find a mechanism for diplomatic agreement to get us there. But just remember what the map of the world looked like 100 years ago. There were empires which lasted a long time, colonialism which went on for hundreds, even thousands of years. However, people here have enough patience and know what is right. These things will come about. Every Argentinian is aware of this. It is in our constitution, and it is in the hearts of all Argentinians that sooner or later we will regain the Malvinas, which are just 700 kilometres off our coastline and more than 14,000 kilometres from the British coast, along with all the riches that are there, fishing, oil, and the Antarctic projects. And this is something that concerns the sovereignty not just of Argentina, but the whole of Latin America.
I'm sure you were aware of that interview, Jeremy Bryan, but What do you make of the phrase suppression? No suppression lasts forever.
Well, nobody is being suppressed. I mean, this is the crucial point. There's about 2,500 people living in the Falkland Islands. They're very proud to be Falkland Islanders, but they can decide their own destiny. Nobody's being held against their own will. The reason they have the existing political arrangements is because they want to have the existing political arrangements. And when the senator talks about colonisation lasting thousands of years, of course, Latin America is a colonised continent. And the reason that people speak Spanish and Portuguese there is because people travelled from Europe to colonise countries like Argentina. So, we can look back, but I don't think it supports the case that the Argentinian senator is making.
It's obviously very close to the hearts of many people in Argentina. Not everybody. There was an interesting article making that point recently that I read. But it's popular, it's emotional, and they care deeply about this. Do you respect that?
I do acknowledge that is the case. I mean, certainly if you do an opinion poll, the majority of people in Argentina want the Falkland Islands to be part of Argentina. But the point that we always make is that we are not holding the people of the Falkland Islands against their will. They are very happy with the existing arrangements. And I think a lot of Argentinians don't understand that is our position. They think that we have this coercive approach in Britain, that we are determined to cling on to the Falkland Islanders and make sure that they are forced to be a part of the United Kingdom. That simply isn't true.
But
I think a lot of people in Argentina are labouring under a misapprehension, which is that Britain has this very aggressive, coercive policy. Actually, we have a completely permissive policy, which is that the people of the Falkland Islands should be allowed to decide their own political future.
Well, it's all about black gold, isn't it?
Well, there is a possibility that there will be significant oil finds in the Falkland Islands area, but that isn't the case, no. I mean, we have had this position consistently over a long period of time, and of course today we're marking the 30th anniversary of the invasion by the Argentinians in 1982, and there was no suggestion then, when Britain won back the islands by military force and 255 British service personnel lost their lives as a result, that we were doing it for oil. I don't accept that at all. We were fighting on that occasion. We have the position now because we believe in the right to self-determination of the Falkland Islands people.
Jeremy Brown, Senator Filmus mentioned oil in one of his answer there. I'm going to bring in an alternative view.
Very quickly, actually, the Falkland Islands and defending the Falkland Islands costs British taxpayers quite a lot of money.
How much?
The idea that we're in it for some sort of
how much does it cost?
Gain. Well, the estimates, but
give us an estimate.
100-200 million pounds. It's in the defence budget figures, and I'm not a defence minister, but
that's 100 donors.
I'm a Liberal Democrat MP, so our donations.
Let's get an alternative view.
That's a whole separate conversation.
Let's get an alternative view. Tim in Manchester. We found an alternative view. On you go, Tim.
I think the Malvinas or the Falklands, whatever they get called, are part of Britain's imperial history when Britain had the biggest navy, secured the world. I can remember from 57 looking at the atlas and seeing the world covered in pink. So I looked at the Encyclopedia Britannica. Britain had got the Falklands to protect its trade routes around the Cape of Horn, as it did with a whole host of other islands. I think we have to resolve it. I mean, fortunately, the Antarctic is not an imperial possession of any one country. Maybe that should be true of the Falklands in terms of the bit of rock which sticks up above the ground.
What about the people who live there, what they want?
Oh, well, I think they should be able to have what they want. That's why I say if they want to have that bit of rock which sticks up above the ground, or we want to support it to the tune of about £1 million a person over the last 20 years, then maybe that has to be the case. But I think the argument is really about the sea shelf and the oil and the fisheries and all the rest of it. And I think that is more clearly Argentinian than anyone else's.
Matt in Perth, let's see Matt in Perth, what do you think of what Tim said? In Australia.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, thanks. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon for us, but good morning to you.
Hi.
Thanks very much. I'm ex-British forces. I was very lucky enough to serve in the war. I'm only 39 years old, but I was very lucky to serve down there in 99. And I think it's all about the people. I appreciate the view of the gentleman from Manchester there, but I think it's all about what the people want. I don't think you can segregate, give the continental shelf and the land underneath them to one person and then have them be whatever they want. At the end of the day, they're British. I served down there in 99 and 2000, and I have to say I never felt more British I think whether it's because these people had it taken away from them and they know what it's like to be British, I've no idea, but I felt more British being there, working with those people, lucky as I was to do so, than I did when I was living back in the UK. So
why don't we separate it? Why don't we separate the rock which sticks out the land, 95% which isn't occupied, from the sea shelf? Why don't we make sure the sea shelf, which is really where the argument sits?
Jeremy Brown, why not that as a solution?
Well, the normal expectations about the amount of sea that you have around the land that you are responsible for apply here as they do everywhere else. So I just want to clarify one thing.
This isn't because a normal situation, is it? We've had a war over it.
Well, let me say a couple of things. One is
Jeremy Brown.
The point about oil has been raised. If there are significant oil finds and money results from those oil finds, that money is for the Falkland Islands people. It's not for the United Kingdom. They decide their own political arrangements. They have their own budgets.
So does that mean an independent Scotland will definitively? We're hearing it from the government. The oil will be that of an independent Scotland. So this seems to be your established principle.
You make an interesting parallel, which is if you have one country in the whole world that can't be accused of holding people against their will in political settlements that they don't feel comfortable with anymore. That country is the United Kingdom. We are so willing to allow people the right to self-determination that it applies to people within the United Kingdom as well as people in the Falkland Islands.
That's big of you.
But ask. I mean, somebody raised the case of Arizona and New Mexico earlier. I mean, you could have countries right around the world see whether the people are comfortable about risking splitting up the territory within those countries. The Falkland Islands determine their own future. There are people in the Falkland Islands whose families go back 9 generations. That is further than many Argentinians can trace their ancestry in Argentina. They have an absolute right to decide for themselves their own political arrangements, their own destiny, and our view is that they should have that right protected and it shouldn't be taken away from them.
Yeah, but that's true of the bit on the land, which is where most people live and exist, and sure, I mean, maybe people have to continue their existence and their means of action and, who they can vote for and all the rest of it. But there is also Falklands, which is fairly empty and so on and so forth. Much of it is empty. So I'm sure there's some arrangement which could be made about that. I'm actually slightly thoughtful about this thing about support of islanders, because remember, during the Falklands War, the ferry services to Scottish Islands was reduced and reduced and reduced. We didn't seem to support them very much.
Matt, do you want to come back in from Australia?
Yeah, I'm hearing the argument here. I think that you can't just say, we'll give them a little bit, we'll give the Argentinians the earth underneath, we'll give them East Falkland. And
we did it in the Antarctic.
It never stops there. And at the end of the day, it's
why not?
That would be their foothold. I think it would be completely unworkable. I think.
Why should we? Why should the Falkland Islands?
We gave back Hong Kong. We gave back Cyprus. We gave back Malta.
I think this is a completely different. I've heard the colonial argument.
What did you say, Tim?
It just doesn't hold. It just doesn't hold because at the end of the day, it's these are British people wanting to be British. The colonial argument doesn't stand up because I think all the places we handed back is from the old. You talk about India and places like that. These people wanted to be their own country. We're not talking about people who want to be anything other than British.
Jeremy Brown, thank you very much for your time this morning. You'll do a lot of more broadcast interviews, but I don't think you'll get as many interesting contributions.
Very lively. Thank you for having me on.
Lively's the word. Thank you, Jeremy Brown. There he is, the Foreign and Commonwealth Minister for the Falklands region. Lively and well informed. And I promise you more from Nigel and Hemel Hempstead. Can you hang on, Nigel? I will come back to you.
I certainly can, Nicky. Thank you.
Great. Sorry to have kept you there, but we got somewhat sidetracked. I will be back with you after the news. Argentina, does it have a point over the Falkland Islands? We're getting our compasses out at the moment. We're working out where else is 700 kilometres from our country. That's one of the claims made by filmers. It's only 700 kilometres from Argentina, the Falklands. 700 kilometres from the British coastline going east is way beyond Munich. It's Geneva. We'll get some more of those comparisons coming in as well. Nigel, our historian of the Falklands, I'm sure you have something else to say.
Yes, I do, actually. The Britons offered on many occasions to take the Falklands dispute to the International Court. Our grounds for doing so are very strong because, as Nicholas mentioned earlier, we were involved with the civil war that happened between Argentina and Spain when the Argentine state was formed. And this was back in the 19th century, around about 1840. A peace treaty was signed between Argentina and the United Kingdom in 1850. Now, it's called the Convention of Settlement, the Arana Southern Treaty. And in that treaty, they did not mention that the Falklands was an outstanding dispute. So the two nations, Britain and Argentina, settled their differences in 1850 after Britain's involvement in Argentina's civil war. And from that point on, Argentina had no claim to the Falklands. They lost any claim. And they didn't dispute it until 1941. In fact, 1940, there was a convention...
they chose their moment, didn't they?
They did. They waited until Britain was at our death's door at Hitler's beckoning in 1940. But in the 1940s, they made their claim to the islands again, believing that we were unable to do anything about it. But you see, the peace treaty itself effectively gave up any legal right in the international courts to a claim on the islands. And moreover, there was a further what we call acquiescence by the Argentine government in what's called the affair of the map. The Argentine government drew up a map of their country in the 1880s. In 1884, it's called. And in that map, they declared or showed the Falklands as a separate set of islands. A separate country, so to speak.
Really?
They called it the Islas Malvinas, and of course the word Islas Malvinas comes from the French Île Marouine, which is what the French called them when they arrived in 1764. But they actually showed the islands, or Islas Malvinas, as a separate country. So they actually showed on that map that even Argentina was accepting in the 1880s, 1884, that they had no claim to the Falklands.
Are you a professional historian or merely a very extraordinary amateur one?
I am an amateur historian, but I have a very strong interest in the Falklands. I have a lot of friends in the Falklands, and I know a lot about the Falklands.
You do? Have you ever held court in a bar in Buenos Aires with any of this stuff?
No, absolutely not.
That's it. Derek Smokey Cole joins us, CEO of the Falklands Veteran Foundation. Derek, good morning.
Good morning, Nicky.
Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
We also have Graham in Wimbledon. Hello, Graham in Wimbledon.
Hello.
Hello. Graham, tell us why you think Argentina has a point.
Well, I suppose it's because of the proximity of the islands to the Argentinian coast and the passion they have over these islands, you know, which many people in this country didn't even know existed. And in fact, when the invasion first took place, I had friends of mine saying, what are the Argentinians doing invading a Scottish island? It never occurred to them that it couldn't be a Scottish island. They also watched the programme just a couple of years before the invasion that followed the patrol ship, which was withdrawn from that area, and the governor of the islands, the guy who drove about in a taxi, had gone native, and he was on the side of the Falkland Islanders, saying that this withdrawal of the patrol ship gives a green light to the Argentinians to invade. Also, the Foreign Office had been trying to get the Falkland Islanders to accept Argentinian sovereignty for years before this invasion. It's the political hypocrisy that really gets my goat.
Political hypocrisy is one thing, but what people who live there actually want, does it not trump that? You know, we are where we are, all that.
Yeah, okay, that must come into it. I'm not saying for 1 minute that they don't have a say in it, but the British government, prior to the invasion, was quite happy to rule them out, almost rule them out of the equation anyway. You know, I mean, the Gibraltarians, which is attached to Spain, they want to remain British. For whatever reason, that's their choice, you know, and I wouldn't sort of oppose that. But I suppose from a Spanish point of view, they think that Gibraltar is theirs, and quite rightly, I think, too. You know, what would you say if you had a foreign force on the Isle of Wight, you know, occupying the Isle of Wight?
But the Isle of Wight's not 700 kilometres away.
No,
we're talking the other side of Geneva.
Okay. There are some Scottish islands that are quite a distance from the mainland that were occupied in the past by, I think, Norwegians and the Danes and God knows who else. And eventually they became British. And I think that will happen with the Falklands anyway. They become Argentinian eventually.
Derek, what do you think?
No, I certainly don't think they should become Argentinian at all. We were there for a very, very long time, and in 1982 the Argentinians were the aggressors. We just went back to reclaim the islands that were rightly ours, and the people on them were British and wanted to remain British, and so they should.
Can I come in here at the moment, please, Nicky?
Oh, I'd be delighted to have you back in, Nigel. Any time you can
Yes,
you should have your own show. Never mind coming in. Go on.
It's a very important point that the Argentine have often made. In fact, they talk about it in their schools a lot, and Nicholas mentioned it first of all. It was to actually say that Britain ejected the Argentine population of the islands when they say that we seized them back in 1833. That's totally incorrect. There were 33 residents of the island back in 1833 after the USS Lexington sacked the settlement. And they only sacked the settlement because the people there were actually pirating US ships. And the point was that we wanted the population to remain on the islands, but we wanted the Argentine garrison, the troops that were sent there by Argentina, to leave. We ejected the troops and told them to go, but we asked the population on the islands to stay, and the majority of the population were Argentine. So we didn't remove the population, as the Argentines said. We actually asked them to stay because the reason we needed them was we needed them to farm the islands to provide beef and cattle and food for the ships that were stopping by.
Of course, but let's bring Stephen in Stonehaven in. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, good morning, Nicky.
Good morning. Yeah, we've still got Nigel. We've got Nicholas, our Argentinian. Have you been listening to this with great interest, Nicholas? You're still with us, are you?
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
I am certainly.
Excellent. And Graham in Wimbledon, and Derek Smoky Cole as well. Graham, we've got some more distances here. Faroe Islands, the Falklands are 600, Malvinas, Falklands, Malvinas, Derry, Londonderry. They are 700 kilometres from the Argentinian coastline. The Faroe Islands are 600 kilometres from the northern British coastline. So they're closer to us than the Falklands are to Argentina.
Yeah, but only just, not a lot of difference, is there, you know?
Well, the Danes might have some...
Yeah, I think it was the Danes who actually owned them or ran them, didn't they? I can't remember, but I know it was the Nordic countries that had sovereignty over those islands at one time.
Yeah.
And they're now British, you know, and no one seems to be quibbling over that.
What's British?
The Faroe, aren't the Faroes British?
No, they're Danish.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I've got other things to worry about rather than what, you know.
I'm saying, you know, Derek, you know, this is the logic, Derek, isn't it?
Well, it is the logic, really. And if the Dutch can own those which are closer to us than what the Falklands are to Argentina, what is the problem?
Well, Stephen, what's your take on this?
Hi, my take is I was a 15-year-old lad when the Falklands started, and I think it's the first main news story that I can remember. I was in among exams, and I followed the news with great interest. And from then, I couldn't believe that Britain would travel so far to have a claim on something that was miles and miles away, and I still can't. And that one incident, the Falklands, is the reason that when I grew up and I could vote, that I've only ever voted SNP. Well,
it's interesting because at the time I remember a friend of mine was a journalist and went to do what they call a vox pop, talking to people, getting views in Clydeside, Red Clydeside, and he knew that this was different because all those Red Clydesiders and those hairy what have you guys of the left were saying, you know, expletive deleted Argentinians, how dare they? And it was a big political turning point for Mrs. Thatcher. Not to say that was the reason for it, some people think it was, but you were actually in the minority if you thought that, Stephen. Polls tell us that. People were furious.
They were, but it was colonialism, it was imperialism, it was Britain at its worst.
Well, this is Argentinian imperialism. As John O'Farrell said in his book, things can only get better. The Labour guy, a very funny guy, he said, you know, it was a disaster for the Labour Party. She was waging war, but it was, Mrs. Thatcher, it was against a fascist dictator. He said it was the worst possible scenario for Labour.
Nicky, why should someone win over a war? Why should Margaret Thatcher look a great leader over a war?
Did you have sympathy for the fascist junta back then?
No, not at all. They were ridiculous. War is ridiculous. No one wins. Organised, legalised killing, that's all war is. But Argentina, give the people of the Falklands dual nationality for a period of time and then return the islands to their rightful owners.
Our Scottish friend there, Nicky, if I can come in. It's
Please,
Derek here.
please.
Did he not welcome the Scots battalions back to their home country?
He probably didn't.
No, not at all. Not in the slightest.
A lot of Scottish soldiers gave their lives.
Yes, they did, and they fought one of the bloodiest battles at Tumbledown.
Tumbledown, yeah, Scots Guards.
Not in my name.
Nor mine.
Well, I'm very surprised. So, So you're going to have no army or anything if you go independent? How are you going to defend yourselves?
Scotland will have a defence force, and that will be it for defending our borders, not for going on tour with the British.
Oh right, okay. So,
one of the most amusing things.
I don't think Stephen's necessarily articulating official policy at the moment, but he says this is what he wants. Come back in, Nicholas, our Argentinian representative here. About what do you think about what you've heard? Go on.
I'm amazed about all these things. I'm here with lots of interest, even if I was not talking.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. It's fascinating to realize how come people think in all these different ways and different reasons and different reasons that everyone has. Today it's been said that nothing is being oppressed, and I want to say that what is being oppressed is the sovereignty of the country. Then it was also said that the Argentines think that England forces the islanders to be British. This is untrue. As I said before, I think we should work together for the islanders to make the transition the best for them. But
what is the transition? What is the transition that is best for them?
To pass the government administration from Britain to Argentina. There is something that
But the islanders don't want that.
Yeah, I know that the islanders don't want that.
But you said to do what's best for them.
What I'm saying is that the island should be under Argentine administration. If the islanders want to remain British, that this is everyone knows, they can keep this is my idea, this is my personal opinion, they can keep both nationalities, and they can be British and Argentines, and they can choose where to live.
They want to be Argentines.
We can live like we can put the Spanish, and the English as the official languages. This is my idea, to work together.
To work together. Greg in Middlesex, come in, Greg. Make your point. Do the Argentinians have a point? Good morning.
Good morning. What an animated conversation.
Yeah.
I would say to some of the people, I mean, you had a chap on a moment that referred to returning Gibraltar to the Spanish. I mean, are the Spanish then to give up their two enclaves, whose name I can't remember, in Morocco? Are they to be returned to Morocco? The whole thing is a nonsense. But I think Argentinian people who desire the return, and of course they're not being there is no return because they were never owned by Argentina in the first place. And this business about, it's closer to us, well, that's an absolute nonsense. That's totally irrelevant. But the point I want to make is surely the Argentinian people must appreciate that without their ill-judged, unfortunate and totally reckless invasion of the Falklands and their subsequent defeat, they would never be enjoying the representative democracy that they are now. The Falklands War did them a huge favour.
Well,
and they should appreciate that.
A lot of young men died.
No, we know that. We know that.
Yeah.
That's what war does. But the fact of the matter is, a military junta, and those young men were conscripts. Our servicemen in the Falklands were not enlisted men, and they were volunteers. They were
professionals.
The Argentinian conscripts. By God, you feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
But the end result was the military junta failed because of its ill-judged adventure in the Falklands, and that defeat has subsequently served Argentina well, which now has a representative democracy.
Do you see it like that, Nicholas? Do people see it? I just wonder as well, those who are younger, who've been born after that Falklands War, that conflict as it is called, because nobody actually waged war, do they not want to look to the future?
Sorry, ask again the question, please.
It was a very long, rambling question. I don't blame you for not. Do people not want to look to the future and just think? This is. Let's stop banging on about this. Let's just get on with it.
I think people do want to look to the future. Of course, there's youth. I mean, I was born. I said before, I was born 4 years after the war. So to me, it's not something that I have lived as many of the Argentines.
What is it? How much does it matter to you?
To me, in a personal level, a lot.
A lot.
A lot.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
It's like having someone. I feel it like, just picture that you have a house with, say, I don't know, 3 or 4 bedrooms, and one of them is occupied, and there is no way for you to get that room back, just because.
Even if that bedroom is 700 kilometres away.
Yes,
like
just because.
Like an outhouse.
Sorry.
I'm just wondering, Derek, come back in. Derek Smoky Cole.
No, I think that they've got the right to self-determination, and the children in their schools are taught about the history of the Falklands. They have visiting veterans returning to the islands, and they welcome into their schools to talk to the younger children coming up through. They have a lot of children they send to the UK for their education as well. And that's how we help them out, and they should certainly remain British, certainly for my lifetime.
Okay,
anyway.
And Nigel, I think, as the star of the morning on this, how do you see it going ahead then?
Well, I'm afraid, Nicky, that whilst Argentina continues to indoctrinate their children that the Falklands are the Malvinas and they belong to them, nothing will change in Argentina. The Charter of the United Nations gives peoples of every country the right of self-determination. That is inalienable. It's the reason we fought the Second World War, to determine our own future. Now, the United Nations Committee on Decolonization suggests that Argentina and the United Kingdom should talk, but the people in the Falkland Islands do not want to talk. They do not want to be Argentine. They want to be British. And I'm afraid this will be a dispute that will carry on for many years to come until the Argentines realise that they've got to accept that it's the people on the islands and their wishes that come first.
But England names a self-determination just when it's convenient to its interests.
When is it not? The principle of self-determination?
When it's not convenient to its interests?
Yeah.
No, of course not.
No, give me an example of when Great Britain has exerted that principle and it's not been in its interest.
Early 1920s, going to the invasions in Middle East, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. So what I have seen here, by being here, is that there were the strikes of the students.
This can of worms just burst open at the end of the programme. Listen, Nicholas, it's much appreciated, and you make some very, very strong and provocative points to think about, and thank you very much as well.
An American sea captain called Jewson, who pirated a few ships, landed on the Falklands, claimed them for Argentina, and then left. He didn't even tell the Argentines that he'd actually done it. They found out through other sources, through other captains reporting what Jewson had done. The settlements by Louis Vernet, Vernet actually reported that he preferred British sovereignty over the Falklands. The British landed in the Falklands originally in 1690. That was the HMS Desire.
Yeah, but the Portuguese beat. This is turning into a fascinating history lesson. The Portuguese beat them to it. They were discovered by members of the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan's, I hope that's right, I've only ever read that word, never said it, expedition in 1520.
No, that's incorrect.
That's what I've got here on my BBC fact sheet. Nigel, you know better. Go on.
There is no guarantee that the islands that were discovered by Magellan's expedition were the Falklands. In fact, it is strongly believed that they may have been the islands of Tierra del Fuego that he actually sighted. But he didn't land, and landing on the islands is the important fact. And that didn't happen until Captain Strong turned up in 1690. So
what about the French in 1764?
They established a settlement at Port Louis.
Right.
That was in 1764. We turned up, that's on East Falkland.
Right.
We turned up on West Falkland.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. I'm Mickey Campbell. It's your call. 30 years on, does Argentina have a point about the Falklands? Events marking the anniversary are going to be taking place in Britain and Argentina today. In just over 2 months during the conflict in 1982, 255 British lives were lost, 649 Argentinians were killed. 3 decades later, the grief for those who fell is shared by both countries. Yet, the row over sovereignty goes on. David Cameron says Britain is committed to upholding the rights of the islanders who want to remain British. It's about self-determination, says the British government, a principle which is upheld by the United Nations. Not so, says Argentina. Those islands were taken from us by the British over 150 years ago. They're on the other side of the world from Britain. They're a legacy of London's imperialist past. In these modern times, the Union flag has no business being flown over Port Stanley. Who does have the moral high ground? Britain, the islanders, or does Argentina have a point? 0500 909 693.
5 Live.
Let's see what the nation thinks about this. The Falklands, 30 years on. Does Argentina have a point? We're going to get back to Tony Banks. We spoke to Tony earlier on, served with 2 para, now a successful businessman. He did A Secret Millionaire where he met a young ex-squaddy who suffered badly from post-traumatic stress disorder. Tony, good to have you back on. You spoke to us a couple of hours back now. Hi.
Yeah, morning.
It was 1829, I think you said. Were the islands...
There was an Argentine representation in the islands.
Were the islands uninhabited?
There was an Argentine settled there in the islands.
The first people on the islands were what? Spanish?
The first people who arrived to the islands, it's not clear if they were Spanish or Dutch, but they were not English.
Right. So there were no indigenous people on the island.
No.
Right. So Spanish or Dutch.
Spanish or Dutch. Yes.
Let's hear from our Dutch callers this morning. They'll be hitting the lines. Carry on.
Yeah, and then, as I said before, the sailors of the corvette, the U.S. Lexington, sacked the port, the goods and the properties, destroyed the artillery, sending the principal settlers to Montevideo in Uruguay.
Right.
And then the mayor, that was called Luis Maria Fernet, he went to Buenos Aires asking for help in 1833. There was a civil war in Argentina. And then England settled on the islands and took British population. So then people who are living in the islands since then are British. They have always been and they will always be. That's out of discussion. Absolutely.
Tom in London, what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting... I think the main point is this. It was said earlier that an Argentine politician has said that the current inhabitants of the Falkland Islands are simply the descendants of colonists. But there's a really key point here. Mm-hmm. The current... By and large, almost overwhelmingly, the current population of Argentina are people descended from colonists. And how did they obtain possession of Argentina? They did that by invading the land, by exterminating the indigenous population. So really, it's a bit rich for current Argentine political figures to use that argument against the Falkland Islands, really.
Do you really, Nicholas Fuster, have the moral high ground, given the extermination of the Amerindians?
Well, it's like this is true what has been said, but it's not true at the same time. Because it's true that in Argentina, first of all, there were people who were killed, and my ancestors were all European. Argentina got lots of immigration, particularly during the Russian Revolution and during both wars, and the Aboriginals have been killed many years before that. I'm not justifying at all.
But it does. Some people see this as a great inconsistency in the position about who was there first. Tom, you can come back in a second. Let's bring Nigel and Hemel Hempstead in, another of our callers. Hi, Nigel.
Good morning, Nicky. Yes, I'm very pleased, actually, to make a contribution here. I'm afraid Nicholas is wrong with his facts. The Argentines actually first arrived on the Falklands in 1820.
And also we've got Nicholas Fuster. I hope the pronunciation is right there, Nicholas. An Argentinian moved to London 2 years ago to study politics. Good morning to you.
Good morning. The pronunciation is perfect.
Oh, well, that's a change for me then. Thank you very much for being there.
Thank you.
We've got Tom in the London area, Nigel and Hemel Hempstead. Good morning, Tom. Hello, Nigel.
Hi.
And many more to come. Nicholas Fuster, make the case for Argentina and the Falklands, or the Malvinas, as you would no doubt call them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the islands belong to Argentina because I have two reasons to say that: geographic reasons and historical reasons. The geographic reasons are not because Argentina is the closest country to the islands, but because the islands are into the Argentine sea shelf. And the historic reasons are that I don't know if many people know this, but the first ones to be there were Spanish, and in 1829, the provinces of the Rio de la Plata, that were the early Argentina, took possession of the islands, and Britain did not complain. Then there was an Argentine mayor there, and the North American and English fishing boats didn't want to pay the fees to fish in the area, to work in the area. So in 1831, the sailors of the corvette called U.S. Lexington sacked the port, the goods and the properties, and destroyed the local artillery.
So were the islands, when you say the Argentinians were the first there?